In this video, we're going to talk about political polarization. What are we talking about when we say polarization? Well, put simply, polarization is getting further apart. That could be voters, that could be political parties, that could be anything. Now, by contrast, a low polarization environment could be observed when most voters agree on something. So let's say there's a blue extreme and a right extreme, but most voters are in the middle. Or most parties are in the middle. There's a lot of overlap in terms of beliefs. And, we could probably draw this kind of like a normal distribution. That is a low polarization environment. There are not many people at the extremes, a lot of people in the middle. A high polarization environment would be when people migrate towards the extremes. This could be voters having extreme beliefs. This could be parties that embody those extreme beliefs. That's what polarization looks like, when people in a political system or parties move to an extreme. There's also, this could look different ways. One way that could look is asymmetric. There's a thing called asymmetric polarization, when the polarization is driven by one group getting more extreme. One group, maybe a political party or a group of voters, might stay, in the middle, status quo, whereas another faction gets more extreme. That's called asymmetric polarization. It's not equal. Now, there are different types of polarization. There can be polarization around an issue, whether you believe something, yes or no, but there's also other kinds. And here's a few examples. The most common one we're talking about when we talk about political polarization is partisan polarization. The political parties get further apart. They get further apart in the things they believe and in the things they want out of governing. And also that means they are less likely to compromise with the other party. There's less bipartisanship. So there are fewer issues where both parties will agree to pass something. That can be problematic in some political systems that require that kind of cooperation. Most collective problems do require some degree of consensus. Ideological polarization is another kind. This is where voters might have really diverging views about the world or about the political system. They might have very different ideas about what the problems are that need to be solved and the solutions to those problems. As a result, they might select more extreme candidates, which could ultimately fuel the other type of polarization, partisan polarization. Another type of polarization is called affective polarization. Affective means emotional, and this is driven by negative feelings between groups. It's the negative feelings that a voter might have towards an outgroup or towards the opposition. It is emotional, it's not issue-based. And this can get worse when your party ID also overlaps with other social or demographic identities like race or geography or age. That really intensifies the partisan animus, the sort of negative feelings towards the other party. And this comes from research by Shanto Iyengar. Affective polarization, not based on issues, based on feelings. You just don't like the other team. Now, related to that is something called negative partisanship. It's the tendency of some voters to form their opinions or to motivate political action, be motivated to political action just out of dislike. They don't care, they don't really believe anything, they're not really concerned about anything, they just know they do not like that other team. And that's what animates them and that's what motivates them. That's called negative partisanship. That can also fuel polarization. I'm going to give you an example of affective polarization. Donuts. Most people like donuts. Most people would agree that donuts are delicious. But what happens if some elite, this could be a political leader, this could be a media personality, this could be a political candidate, somebody takes an extreme position on donuts, we should boycott donuts, do not eat donuts, donuts are evil. Well, what happens? Typically, people that align with that person, maybe they're in that person's sort of social group, maybe they identify with them as a political community, or maybe that person is a political leader. The public, people in that community, will adopt their leader or their group's position on donuts. Then the public starts to polarize on the donut issue. Some people are very anti-donut, some people are still pro-donut. That's an example of how polarization can be fueled by that affective element. Now, here's the thing. People don't really care about donuts. But the politics around donuts becomes performative rather than substantive. It doesn't matter if you like donuts or not. It's important that you are seen to take a side, that you demonstrate to the other people in your team that you have a position on donuts. You're conforming to your in-group and you're demonstrating your loyalty by vocally taking a side on the donut issue. Key to that is opposing the out-group. Other team is bad. That's sort of the nature of affective polarization. You don't like the other side, so you must adopt the contrary position on the donut issue. It's a way of thinking about this. It's not really what you believe, it's who you are against. Who you are against is more important than what you believe in an affective polarization environment. Now, I mean, this sounds absurd, but really this fits with sort of the mechanics of opinion formation and voting behavior. Research by Philip Converse way back in the 60s, he found that he surveyed the same people over time. Their position on issues went all over the place. They would be for an issue and then they'd be against it in the next period. But the one thing that remained consistent was their partisan ID. And he found that their party attachment was something that was formed relatively early in life, as they first start to vote and get interested in politics, and it remained stable. That was pretty consistent. We form these party identities pretty early, and we stick with them. The role of ideology or position on specific issues, that is minimal. That has less influence than the group attachment. Now, why do voters take sometimes contrary positions? They might believe one thing in one time period and a different thing in the other period. Well, they are cued by their political elites, whether that be politicians or journalists, media personalities, podcast hosts, YouTube personalities, journalists, people in the media. They can dictate, they can shape, they can influence voters' position on issues. And again, that sort of comes from research by John Zaller. That's following elite cues. So people have their stable partisan identity. People that are important in that party or that group will cue them to believe certain things at certain times. And so some of those things lie at the heart of what's driving polarization, especially affective polarization. Why is it a problem? Well, when there's this kind of us against them political tribalism, competition becomes zero-sum. One side wins, the other side loses. That's not good for governing, because governing is all about solving collective action problems. If governments can't do that, then it's not going to work effectively. This can erode trust in government. People might be suspicious of government officials, people in the scientific community, other public policy officials, and that has risks for just the functioning of society and for governing. It's hard to govern when people do not trust the government. So just to recap, polarization means getting further apart. This could be parties, could be voters, can be driven by political elites. Political elites can cue and influence their supporters to take sides on one issue or another. A lot of the polarization that we observe is affective. It's emotional rather than based on issues and considerations about policy. Affective polarization, negative partisanship, two forces that are very prevalent in today's politics.